All right, so if you will remember that type 2s, the passion is pride and the virtue is humility. So all of us have a bit of both of those in us. 2s just have a more invested interest in it. So that's where we are. And for 2s, it's all about relationships, okay? And relationships are a two-sided coin. 2s are very happy to oblige. They're happy to give. They're happy to be of assistance. But they're also happy to put you in their debt. Okay? And that they may or may not be aware of. Okay? Now that's part of the subtlety of the 2. They are giving, but they often give with the idea of it's a reciprocal agreement, but they're not always aware of that until they start feeling slighted. And if they begin to feel slighted, that ought to be a wake-up call that they had an investment in the whole situation. Okay? So we're, in other words, it's a process of keeping score, but very quietly. You know, not necessarily advertising that to anybody else. Okay? Givers have something valuable to give. And in fact, we all have something valuable to give. But when you feel that you are the person who has something to give, that both raises your self-esteem, which is a normal thing, but it can also grow to where I'm feeling superior. Mm-hmm. Because I can provide this, I can give this, you can't. Okay? And so unhealthy 2s, what you have with a healthy 2, you have giving. With an unhealthy 2, you have investing. Okay? The boundary issues get muddled for a 2. 9s have trouble with their boundaries, but 2s do also, but it's specifically tied to their identity. The pride is a element where you give, and you want to give, but there's also this need to receive nothing from anyone else. In other words, I can give because you're needy, but I'm not needy. Therefore, I don't need anybody else to give. The word need is a key word for 2s. On the conscious level, you know that iceberg that is above the water line? On the conscious level, they try to meet needs. They try to be helpful. And they are. Every organization loves 2s because they will step in and they will do the work and they will do it almost effortlessly. But on the unconscious level for the 2, that unseen, hidden, unmet emotions that are under the surface of the water. They have their own unmet emotional needs. Everyone does. It's a human condition that we don't get all our emotional needs met as we are growing up. And that does a number on our personality as we grow up. So they have these unmet emotional needs, but they don't have the ability to admit to it, or even sometimes to see that they need to have somebody help them, assist them. So it gets very sticky, kind of like a spider web. You know, you can touch it, but it's always sticky, and then it's hard to get it off your hands. So, what do 2s want? Well, the deepest desire is to be loved for who they are. just that their own inner self would be loved. 2s are often the people that can look you eye to eye, right in your face, because they're searching for the God in you to connect with the God that is in them. Okay? Now, what do they settle for? Well, it gets kind of tricky looking for the God in everybody, and so instead they settle for, instead of being loved, they settle for affection and praise and you taking notice of what they're doing. Okay? Appreciation, recognition. Oh, woe to the person who doesn't recognize the efforts of a 2 given in their behalf. You know. But the fact of the matter is, 2s have to learn you don't earn love. Love is a gift, and it simply comes. It simply has to be accepted. So one of the key elements of a 2 is they have to learn to accept a gift. They're so used to giving, but they have to learn to accept it, and to accept it with grace and humility. 2s need to give up on earning love and instead begin to look for love by taking care of yourself. Now that seems diametrically opposed, but it is foundational in all of our personality makeups, is to start with a good foundation. And the foundation is that God has given us, we are all made in God's image. And from the Old Testament to the New Testament, what is the greatest commandment? Love the Lord your God with all your heart, your mind, your body, your strength, and your soul. Okay? And Jesus adds, and what's the second commandment? Love your neighbor as yourself. Oh my goodness. What a tricky one to throw in there. See, it's a lot nicer to think about loving God, who is this being that it's kind of hard to exactly understand who God is, and we look and we search for that all our lives. But then he puts it down in concrete terms. And the second commandment, love your neighbor as yourself. So a lot of us start with the neighbor, start loving the neighbor. But loving the neighbor is conditional on how do you love yourself. And so there is a stipulation in there, a requirement, if you will, or an expectation that you will know how to love yourself. That you will know to like yourself. So many of us don't even like ourselves. You know, we get frustrated with what we do or we can't do. But let's start with that, because that's the foundation. And that's what the 2 really at the back of everything is looking for, is being able to accept who they are and be able to be understood in that light and be able to simply accept the love that is given them. It's not a love that's due them. It's a love that's given. Okay? And, you know, that's really a subtle, easily twisted, manipulated aspect of the 2. So it can make the 2 a very difficult type to deal with. So what does the 2 do? They begin to look for love by taking care of others, because they know how much they want to be taken care of, and so they know how to take care of others. And you know, that builds up your self-esteem, doing something nice for someone. We teach our children that. When people are depressed, one of the key things that they're told to do is stop this destructive self-talk that you're doing and go focus on somebody else. Go do something for someone else. to get yourself out of this little bottomless pit that you've been digging about yourself. Think about someone else. And it is a good thing. However, self-esteem is truly an inner reality that is already present within you. You don't have to create self-esteem from outside of yourself. Now, that's not saying that outside trappings of people expressing appreciation and recognition doesn't help build self-esteem. It does, okay? But if you internalize that to reinterpret it so that it becomes your reality, your self-esteem then is all built upon other people saying something about you. Did you do good? Did you do not? You know, you can't accept in yourself, I did a good job. And my mother told me this story one time that I came home from church one day, and I must have been like 5 or 6 years old. And I had a new dress on and all, and I said, I was the prettiest girl at Sunday school. My mother said, did someone tell you that? No, I just knew it. You know, that's the self-esteem of a child that simply doesn't need anybody else. You just felt good about yourself, okay? And that's a healthy self-esteem, okay? And self-esteem begins with the esteem of life that you hold internally. Because we all know you can have high self-esteem one day and low self-esteem the next day. You can get kind of your knees cut out from under you. We have to begin with a good foundation. Saul Gordon, who was a sex educator in the last century, said there were 2 ways to generate self-esteem. One is to learn something new. You know, that gives you confidence. The other is doing something to aid or assist someone else without reward. And that's key to the whole assisting. Without reward, without expectation that there's a quid pro quo involved. So self-esteem is, I am lovable as I am. And when you feel loved, you have this self-confidence that doesn't fear about giving to others. You don't feel that when you are giving, someone's taking advantage of you. Okay. In Luke 14, there are a group of parables. There's about 3 parables right in a row that are called the meal parables. And it's interesting to note in the Jewish tradition that table fellowship was extremely important. So much so that we don't really get it. You know, it was just vital in how they related to one another. It built boundaries and it created identity. And remember the parables. This is a quote from the book on page 40, that the purpose of the parables is to challenge and unravel the cultural and spiritual expectations or identity and principles. So these parables are meant to disrupt. They're meant to surprise you and make you think about something, and you may have to change your mind because it's looking at life from a totally different vantage point than what the culture generally has decided. And it's interesting to note the word sinner in all of this context is really a technical term for those who didn't obey the law. Now, out of the New Testament, we sometimes have a much different understanding of what sin is. But if you would take it in the context of Jesus was accused of eating with sinners. He was eating with people who noticeably did not follow the Jewish laws. Okay? And that's all the traditions that were added onto the laws and the interpretation of that as they understood within that community. So parables, these meal parables, are dealing with boundaries and love. This parable here in Luke 14 is not talking about a way to advance spiritually. Okay, so if I follow this, I'll advance spiritually. Instead, it's simply saying, wake up and be who you are. There's nothing else to it. There's absolutely nothing else to it. Just be who you are. So let me read this scripture. And I'm going to read it first in, I believe, the New Revised Standard Version. Okay. So he went on to tell a story to the guests around the table, noticing how each one had tried to elbow into the place of honor. You know, boundaries. This is my place. Scoot over. You know, I'm reminded of when the dog gets in the bed and push him over. You're on my boundaries. Okay. And he said, when someone invites you to dinner, don't take the place of honor. Somebody more important than you might have been invited by the host. Then he'll come and call out in front of everybody, you're in the wrong place. The place of honor belongs to this man. Red-faced, you'll have to make your way to the very last table, the only place left. When you're invited to dinner, go and sit at the last place. Then when the host comes, he may very well say, friend, come up to the front. That will give the dinner guests something to talk about. What I'm saying is if you walk around with your nose in the air, you're going to end up flat on your face. But if you're content to be simply yourself, you will become more than yourself. He's not really telling you how to get the best seat. That's not the point of the story. It's be yourself. Be who you are. And then he turned to the host. The next time you put on a dinner, don't just invite your friends and family and rich neighbors, the kind of people who will return the favor. Invite some people who never get invited out. The misfits from the wrong side of the tracks. You'll be and experience a blessing. They won't be able to return the favor, but the favor will be returned. Oh, how it will be returned at the resurrection of God's people. It's an internal reward because you're operating out of the abundance that God lives in. And you have seen enough to be able to operate out of their abundance instead of judging who or where they are or where they come from. Boundaries build and promote identity, but where is your boundary? Is it dictated by what other people say and put on you? Or does it come from inside so that you know who you are and you're able to accept the abundance of who you are? The purity codes in the Old Testament kept separation so that you would stop moving away from God. The purpose was to keep you close to God. But in effect, they began to make it harder and harder for people to get close to God. They created the exact opposite effect. Boundaries meant, I am this, you are this, And that identity lets me know whether I can mix with you or not. Okay? He eats with sinners. That's what they declared. And it was the idea, here Jesus is saying, it's the idea that if you are with the group, you are guilty by association, and Jesus chooses to eat with the bad group. Okay? The group that is not close to God. That's challenging the cultural understanding. I came for those who are sick, not those who are well. He goes on and says, humility is something that you cannot try to do it. You either do it or you don't. It's not something you can work at, because it is an acceptance of a different reality of the understanding of power and relationship. So that when you have people who invite someone in and they're noticeably disturbed by the quality or lack of quality of that person, and then you have another host or hostess who invites you in and is able to embrace you and say, oh, just come in. You know, those are wonderful stories that we talk about and that we remember. False humility stinks. It has an odor about it, that it's like it just doesn't feel right. And you get the idea that the person is not genuine. You know, all of us have probably said this. I know I have, so I'm assuming that you have too at some point. Oh, I'm really bad at this. Just so that somebody will say, no, you're really good. You really do this well. Well, what are you looking for when you're doing that? What is it you're looking for? What?
Affirmation.
Affirmation.
Validation.
Validation. But why can't you ask for that instead of going this manipulative around the door way? Why can't we? Think about that for a minute. Why can't we be honest about it instead of trying to manipulate someone? It's because we don't want to be seen as being needy. It's needy to want affirmation. And for a 2, you can't be needy. Well, but think about it for a minute. Don't all of us need affirmation? Is that a bad thing to need affirmation? Not really. It's a bad thing if you need it and have to sneak around and try to dig it up somewhere. Because it
has to be given. You can't ask.
Yeah. Love has to be given. And you know what? Sometimes people just forget to say thank you. They may have really appreciated what you did, but they just forgot to say thank you. Or maybe they said thank you a time ago, and you know it's still in vogue. Why do you have to have thank you all the time? You know. So, parables are about the kingdom of God. And there's something about parables that require prayer. Prayer is a foundation to your relationship with God. Prayer is how you relate to God. Prayer is not a jar of asking for things that you want. Okay, we have to understand prayer as this relationship. So for a 2, prayer is foundational. It's key to their relationship building with God and within themselves. A relationship with God is involved, and so the prayer life is needed. You can't exalt yourself into God's kingdom. You can't humble yourself into God's kingdom. You can be grateful that God has invited you in because you didn't build it. You participate in it. Pride is trying to get something from the outside of you to be bestowed and to make a difference inside of you. Okay? So that's what pride is trying to do. The problem is, if something is given to you with outside trappings, it can be taken away. Anything that has been given to you can be taken away. What God starts with at the very beginning is giving you the image of God. And that is not taken away. But we bury it and forget that it's there. So part of the prayer is helping us uncover it and rediscover that you have been a precious child of God all along. And you are loved because you are. In Matthew 1-6, this is what's said. At that time, the disciples came to Jesus and asked, "Who's the greatest in the kingdom of heaven?" He called a child whom he put among them and said, "Truly I tell you, unless you change and become like children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Whoever becomes humble like this child is the greatest of the kingdom of heaven. Whoever welcomes one such child in my name welcomes me." It's that childlike ability to just accept what is. You don't already have a preconceived idea of what's supposed to be. You're open to what will come. And then he continues, and this is for all of us because we all do this. If any of you put a stumbling block before one of these little ones who believe in me, it would be better for you if a great millstone were fastened around your neck and you were drowned in the depth of the sea. Just don't crush a childlike spirit. Don't. And that includes your own. That includes your own. Children's development, we know, is so extremely important. Don't lie to them. Don't lead them astray. Just don't do that. Last night I watched for the first time The Secret Life of Bees. Oh, yeah. And it's a marvelous story. And at the very end, her dad is leaving her with these women to be raised, and she runs out the door and asks the question she's been dying to know all her life is, did my mother come back for me or just to get her things? Because the mother came back, the child was 4 years old. The mother comes back after having run away for a while, and the dad had told her that she just came to get her things and then she was taken off again. And spoiler alert, I'll tell you the story, is the dad and mom are fighting, and a gun is dropped, and the child picks up the gun and shoots the mother. And she's 4 years old. Okay, so she's lived with this all of her life, you know. And these women that she's with swear to her that the mother was going back to get her. So she runs out to this car, and before the dad goes, "Is it true? Did she come back for me?" And finally, he says, "Yeah, I lied to you. She came back for you." And so she said, "Why did you lie to me?" And he thinks, and then he says, because she didn't come for me. People need other people. It's not a bad thing. But then when you don't get what you need, he let that child live all of her 10 years thinking that her mother did not want her. That is the epitome of this scripture that says, don't create a stumbling block. Because how does a child grow up thinking that their mother didn't love them and their father didn't love them? We all know that's a great detriment to the psychological development of a human being. We're made in the image of God, with God possibilities in each of us. Don't trample on that gift. Don't hurt that inner child. If someone else doesn't love you, you don't need that love as much as you need your own ability to love yourself, because their love is never going to get you what you think you need. What you need is the ability to love yourself and to accept God's love for you. The good God gives us is within us. It's always there, but we have to discover it. We have to let it out. And yes, what's around us does affect us. So there's no way we can get away with that. But pride wants someone else to give me my value, to assign my place according to what I have earned. How are we doing on time? Okay. If you or I were invited to go to the White House for dinner, where would you expect to sit? Way in the back. I mean, that's an easy one. That's an easy one. But what about if you were going to your grandmother's house? Or to someone that you know fairly well, where do you sit? Twos need to be grounded in their relationship with God and with ourselves. We need to like ourselves. When God gives us a place at the table, gosh, rejoice that you're at the table. Instead of like the disciples were, well, can I sit next to you? Can we do this? Just rejoice that you're there at the table. One of the things about twos, I talked about the word in the title, labor. Twos love labor. Twos try too hard. Trying hard defeats itself. You cannot get to humility by trying to be humble. Acceptance, humility is acceptance about what happens to you through grace, not grudgingly. You don't try to be harder, you just be. You drop the effort of trying. And how hard is that? We are taught, just try. Just try it. Just work a little harder. Just a little bit more effort and you can do it. And yet here in the spiritual realm, the efforting will get you exactly the opposite of what you're trying to get to. You have to accept. It's called a theology of grace when we talk about it. Twos need to learn to accept the grace of God and to relax.
Accept what?
Accept the grace of God and relax. Meeting people's needs out of our own neediness won't work because you can't earn love. We do things out of a sense of gratitude to God not out of a sense of gratitude to other people. When you do things out of a sense of gratitude to other people, we often do them grudgingly, where it's like, oh, they did this for me, now I've got to, what do I need to do, you know?
One of the lines I picked up was, if it's conditional, it isn't love.
That's right. That's right. If it's conditional, it isn't love. Now there's a deeply held Jewish idea, the mitzvah. And mitzvah literally means commandment, okay? But these are the words, I was looking at Wikipedia and some different things. In its secondary meaning, Hebrew mitzvah, as with the English commandment, refers to a moral deed performed within a religious duty. As such, the term mitzvah has also come to express an individual act of kindness in keeping with the law. The expression includes a sense of heartfelt sentiment beyond mere legal duty, as you shall love your neighbor as yourself. The tertiary meaning of mitzvah also refers to the fulfillment of mitzvah or kindness. So when I am kind, it's not because I want to help you necessarily, it's because I'm fulfilling the law. Okay? Because that is a requirement of the law, that I be kind to people, that I give help when it is needed, that those are parts of the law. And so it's not because of you, it's because of God that I am giving, that I am living out of that. If I keep the law, that began to mean that was the same as being righteous before God. Because the laws are there to help me know where God is and how I can stay close to God. But this parable turns that upside down and says, no, you can't earn right standing with God. You keep the law out of gratitude for what God has done for you, not out of, this is the way that if I keep this, then I will get to heaven. I'll be close to God. See the subtlety of that? It may look the same to a person who is receiving help, but God is the one who knows what's going on in the heart. Okay? The idea of keeping the law can damage us emotionally if we take it to that nth degree. It messes up our relationships as we seek to manipulate people so that we can manipulate the outcome. Keeping the law is a way of not needing God. Do you see that? Yeah. If I keep the law, I don't need to worry about my relationship with God, because that becomes my relationship with God, is keeping the law. Remember last week we talked about the Pharisee standing and praying, thank God that I'm not like that sinner over there. And then the sinner was saying, oh God, have mercy on me, a sinner. You know, it's that kind of instance where keeping the law is keeping you from God. It's a way of not needing God. It's a way of circumventing the need for your relationship. Because if I keep the law, I don't have to trust God. Because the law says, see, the law gives you a standard. It gives you a thing, this, 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 this. I don't have to interpret it. But life has to be interpreted. We don't know what's coming around the corner. You have to, you come to a situation with your family and you don't know who's going to say what. There's not a book that's going to give you the exact answer. You have to interpret the law of love in your heart and in your relationships. And that calls for an ongoing relationship with God. Not a simple law that you can pick out of this and say, okay, this applies here. See what the difference is? And part of needing of what's involved in that relationship is acknowledging our neediness and opening up this vulnerability to know that I don't know what the answer is. I'm not sure what the outcome's going to be. I may like it, I may not. So it exposes our vulnerability. I like what he said on page 45. Parables make visible the dynamics of the life of grace that Jesus lived. See, Jesus lived life and used these parables of illustrations of how he lived life and what was the basis, the foundation for where that life came from and what he did. Abundance is the modus operandi that God operates out of. When we are in our automatic mode, living out of our type, out of the tapes that we've learned in childhood, we're living from an impoverished understanding of the world as it relates to our experiences. And abundance is what Jesus lived out of and what he invites us to live out of. I gave you a piece of paper. This comes from Moses Maimonides, who lived 1,000 years ago or so. He was a medieval Sephardic Jewish philosopher, quite well known in his time and very well regarded in his time and ever since. He became one of the most prolific and influential Torah scholars of the Middle Ages. In his time, he was also a preeminent astronomer, physician, and worked as a rabbi, physician, and philosopher in Morocco and Egypt. Here are something that have been famous for centuries, the 8 levels of charity. The interesting thing is, let's start at the bottom, okay? The basic grasp of generosity is when somebody gives, but they give unwillingly. I mean, that's the worst kind of... It's like the parent teaching their child, give your sister one of the pieces of candy. Okay. You give unwillingly because this higher authority has said, do it or else. It will not be good for you if you don't do it. Okay?
Almost like taxes.
Yeah, that's right. A little bit higher step up is when you give inadequately, but at least you gave gladly and with a smile. Okay, it's when your child comes to you and gives you a half-eaten piece of candy, but they do it with such generosity, that you can't say no. And you take it and you just kind of hide it. Pretend like you ate it. Okay. And then a step up from that is when you give to a poor person after they've asked. Okay, so you're really not awake and aware of what's going on in the world, and you take care of yourself and you don't worry about anybody else. And then a step higher, when you give to the poor person directly into his hand, but do it before he asks. Okay, a little bit. I bet we can all come up with instances when we've done each one of these kinds of things. And then the one up above that one, a charity. This is when one does not know to whom one gives, but the poor person does know who the benefactor is. Okay, so that you don't make them feel ashamed that they have to acknowledge it or anything. They can just accept it. All right? So we're getting better and better. And then the level of charity, that this is one where one knows to whom one gives, but the recipient doesn't know who the benefactor is. Okay. Like we invite people at our church to pick up a family or a tag for a senior or a child and go and buy such and such a gift that has been requested, and we buy it and then we bring it back and somebody takes the gift to them. Okay? That's a nice way that child or that person receives what they need. Okay? And then the next one is to give to the poor without knowing who you give and without the recipient knowing from who he received. These are called charities. We give to charities all the time. You're asked to donate $100, $50, something. This is performing a mitzvah solely for the sake of heaven.
That's taxes.
This is like the anonymous fund. But I love what he then goes on to say. There the righteous gave in secret, and the good poor profited in secret. Giving to a charity fund is similar to this mode of charity, though one should not contribute to a charity fund unless one knows that the person appointed over the fund is trustworthy and wise and a proper administrator. In other words, even 1,000 years ago, they had the same problems that we do, is businesses and charities need to be audited. And if they're audited, they shouldn't have any problem being audited. But the greatest level, which there is no greater, is to support a fellow Jew by endowing him with a gift or loan or entering into a partnership with him or finding employment for him in order to strengthen his hands so that he will not need to be dependent upon others.
So teaching the man to fish rather than giving him a fish.
Teach a man to fish instead of just giving him a fish. That's exactly where it comes from.
The other thing I read into that, number one, was you're taking responsibility for this person's welfare.
Mm-hmm.
Not making them a dependent, but actually going the extra mile to make sure they're okay.
That they're okay. That's right. And we have a group in our church called the Open Table. And the Open Table is actually in many places in the United States now and even in other countries. But it actually started in this church, is that one person saw a person in need and realized that they couldn't just help them. They needed assistance, but they needed assistance for a time. So they gathered a group of people around them called a table to look at their financial needs, to look at their emotional needs, their physical needs, family needs. Some people that they have several tables now that they're doing around foster children or children moving out of the foster care system who at age 18 are just out on their own. Well, in our society, not many people are ready to be out on their own at age 18. They don't know the ropes, they don't know it. So you surround them with a table to help give them confidence, to help teach them, how do I do things in life? And people who have that experience can do that. So you walk with the person for at least a year and help them get on their feet so that then they can move on. And it's amazing how that is transforming peoples. It's called, I think one of the ways they name it is bringing people out of homelessness one person at a time. Instead of trying to throw
and
everything.
Another word that comes to mind is you establish a relationship.
Yes, you establish.
Rather than just giving them some money or giving them a gift.
Yeah, because think of it. if you're required to put part of your relationship in this event, that's requiring an awful lot more of you than just giving $50.
Another part of that, along with that, is to ask them what they need rather than assume.
And then just assume. Yeah, that's why it becomes it has to become a conversation. That relationship, again, it has to be a give and a take. Very good. Okay, so the parable, remember the very end of the parable I read before, is he turned to his host. The next time you put on a dinner, don't just invite your friends and family and rich neighbors, the kind of people who will return the favor. Instead, invite those of you who can't pay you back. That will be a blessing. Mission trips. When people go on mission trips, I know there's pros and cons about mission trips. Do they do any good? Gosh, you could send money that could do a lot more than just putting that. But part of the thing about mission trips is you are teaching relationship, and you're inviting people in relationships to be able to invest themselves. Not just their time, but actually themselves. And participating in mission events are life-changing events for people. They make us, like a parable, they make us see the world differently and in a new element. He talks about twos having trouble with muscular piety. I like that word. In other words, if I just try harder, I can make it. I can do it. It's you get to heaven by your own moral self-will, by trying harder. That forgets that God is a partner in the equation. Okay? We need to remember that God gives first. And you giving is in proportion to what God has given to you, not in proportion to the needs of others. You will not be able to meet everybody's needs. There is no way. And there's really not an expectation except the one you put upon yourself to feel guilty about that. When I was in college, I was with a group that went around and sang in some churches, and one of the songs that we sang had this line, "Freely, freely you have received, freely, freely give." Just very simple, very simple. Where is our psychological center of gravity when you see God as the first giver? It totally changes how you look at the world. When basic relationships are grounded first in God, our life changes. And how we relate to people changes. And we're not looking to be defined by the needs of other people. We grow as we feel secure in love. And that's what discovers and reveals our self-esteem and builds our self-esteem. Because unless you're able to receive love, your self-esteem doesn't really grow. Okay? Saying positive things to people, genuinely loving things to people will build self-esteem. So for twos, dwelling on God's love for you is a vital part of developing an emotional prayer life. So, any comments anybody wants to make?
You know, in our family, we were not supposed to brag.
Oh, you can't brag.
You cannot brag on yourself, for sure. And so compliments were not passed out because we
Yes.
have swelled heads.